In a quiet corner of Kentucky, where endless grasslands stretched out and rows of mobile homes stood like worn wooden boxes beneath the fading afternoon sun, lived a girl named Isabel Ray. She was just 11 years old, but her deep brown eyes held a silent world, a place filled with old memories and unanswered questions that clung like stubborn weeds along the roadside. Isabel hadn't lived with her parents since she was 6. Instead, she lived with her great-grandmother Ruth, a woman whose hair was as silver as frost and whose trembling hands still tried every morning to make her granddaughter a warm cup of tea. Isabel's mother had left when she was barely a year old. Her father, a man who once promised to come back when things got better, disappeared one night on a bus to Florida, leaving behind only a faded baseball cap and a promise that the wind soon carried away. Before we continue with Isabel's remarkable journey, if you believe that true worth lies not in appearances or circumstances, but in unwavering strength and passion, please hit the like button and subscribe so we can share more inspiring stories like this. Now, let's return to the story, where more surprises await. Isabel rarely asked questions. Grandma Ruth would say, "Sometimes adults lose their way, but that's not your fault." Isabel would nod quietly. Yet on cold nights, when the wind slipped through the crack of her window, she'd clutch a small suitcase she kept carefully hidden beneath her bed. Inside were no clothes or toys, just a pile of old papers, a few worn notebooks, and songs she had written from the fragments she remembered about her family. One song told of a dinner long ago, when the whole family still gathered beneath the twinkling lights of a camper van. Another repeated a single line over and over. "Why do people leave before I get to ask what I did wrong?" Isabel never formally studied music. Her school only had choir once a week, but she loved singing, not to perform, but to preserve what had never been said. Often she would sit behind the house beside a stack of old tires, singing softly amid the hum of cicadas and the scent of wet grass. Grandma Ruth would sit nearby on an old wooden chair, quietly mending clothes for neighbors, humming along to Isabel's melodies. "You sing just like your grandmother used to," Ruth would say, her voice soft but full of warmth. "Real things, and those that are truly meaningful, last a long time." Lately, Grandma Ruth had been coughing at night, long, harsh coughs that seemed to drain all her breath. Isabel often woke up startled. One night she asked softly, "Are you okay, Grandma?" Ruth smiled, squeezed her hand, and said, "As long as I can hear you sing, I'll be okay." One afternoon, after finishing her homework at the public library, Isabel noticed a small ad flashing on an old computer screen. America's Got Talent auditions now open for the new season. She didn't know much about the show, but when she clicked the link and watched a few clips, a smile slowly spread across her face, not because of fame or bright lights, but because on that stage, people actually listened. For the first time in her life, she thought, "Maybe someone will listen to my song from beginning to end, without interrupting, without scrolling away." That night, Isabel went to the bathroom, the only room in the house without a leaky roof, and where her voice echoed softly. She placed the old phone her grandmother had lent her on the porcelain ledge, pressed record, and began to sing her newest song, Paper Houses. It was about homes made of paper, fragile and easily torn, but still built with hope. She didn't expect much. Before going to bed, she carefully wrapped the phone like a small, precious dream and placed it under her pillow. The next morning, the sky was still gray as usual, but inside Isabel, for the first time in a long while, a small ray of sunlight stirred, warm and trembling, like the soft voice she sang each night for those who had left and for herself. 2 weeks after recording the video in that bathroom, Isabel Ray received a phone call that her great-grandmother Ruth thought was a prank. "Hello. Is this a relative of Isabel Ray?" "Yes, I'm her grandmother. We're calling from America's Got Talent. We've seen Isabel's audition video. The judges would like to invite her to Los Angeles for an in-person audition." There was a long silence. Ruth gripped the phone tightly and glanced over at her granddaughter, who was drying dishes in the tiny kitchen of their mobile home. Her voice nearly broke as she whispered, "She got picked." "Yes, and we will cover all travel expenses." That night, as Ruth retold the story, Isabel sat quietly. Then tears began to fall, not loud or sobbing, just gentle tears as she buried her face in Ruth's shirt. "Do you think I can really do it?" "I don't know," Ruth admitted softly. The bus ride to Los Angeles took nearly 2 days. They sat in the very last row, holding onto the old suitcase. Inside were a few simple outfits, a handwritten copy of Isabel's song Paper Houses, and the last remaining photo of her family, her father, her mother, and a toddler-aged Isabel standing in front of a silver blue camper van. At the first rest stop, a boy about Isabel's age sat beside her and asked, "Are you going to compete?" Isabel smiled and nodded. "What's special about you?" She hesitated, then replied softly, "I have something I want to say through a song, but I can only sing it with my eyes closed." The next morning, Los Angeles greeted them with golden sunlight and towering buildings, so tall that Ruth had to tilt her head all the way back just to see the tops. A small van from the show's production team picked them up and took them to a hotel near the studio. Inside the glass elevator, Isabel said nothing, only holding her grandmother's hand tightly. The audition was scheduled for the next day. Backstage, other children wore glamorous makeup and had personal coaches guiding their every move. Isabel sat quietly on a wooden bench, her hair neatly tied back with a worn fabric ribbon made by Grandma Ruth. She wore an old floral dress Ruth had mended twice and a pair of thrift store sneakers. A staff member from the show approached her. "Do you need a backing track?" "No, thank you. I'll sing a cappella." The staff member looked slightly surprised but nodded. "Then do what feels most real to you." When it was Isabel's turn to step onto the stage, the spotlight shone directly in her face, making it impossible to see the audience clearly. But she knew her grandmother was there, in the third row, hands resting on her knees, eyes tired but never once leaving her. Simon Cowell leaned toward the microphone. "What's your name?" "Isabel Ray." "Sir? And what will you sing today?" "A song I wrote. It's called Paper Houses." "Why did you write that song?" Isabel's voice trembled just a little. "Because sometimes the things we think are strong fall apart, like a house made of paper. But I still hold on to them, because they're the only things I have left." Simon looked at her, his expression softening. "Are you ready?" Isabel nodded. Then she closed her eyes and began to sing. Her voice rose, not loud or forceful, but clear and achingly real. Every note, every word felt wrapped in memory. The creaking wheels, the wind rattling their trailer, the scent of the mint tea Ruth brewed on cold nights, and the empty space where the family photo used to hang, now just a yellowed patch on the wall. "I build them still, paper houses in my sleep, with doors they never locked and rooms I couldn't keep." The entire auditorium held its breath. Not a single cough, not a single laugh. And when Isabel reached the final line, "I still wait inside my paper home," she opened her eyes and saw Simon leaning on the desk, his gaze lowered. A female judge had her hand pressed over her heart, tears welling in her eyes. No one stood up, not because they didn't care, but because no one dared to break something so fragile, something that had just touched their hearts. It was the first time Isabel sang with her eyes open, and realized she didn't need to close them anymore, because for the first time someone was truly listening. After the performance, Isabel stepped away from the spotlight, her hand clutching the edge of her dress. Backstage, her great-grandmother Ruth was already waiting, wrapping her in a tight hug the moment she came. "My darling," Ruth whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You sang like an angel." No one spoke to them for several minutes. Backstage crew members only nodded slowly, their eyes still fixed on the stage where something had just happened, something they couldn't quite name yet. At that very moment, in a technical room behind the stage, a producer was rereading a letter printed on old paper, one sent to the show a few weeks earlier. "My name is Ruth Holman. I'm not writing this letter to ask for pity. I just want to share that my granddaughter, Isabel Ray, truly believes that if she can sing on television, maybe her parents will see it and come back. I don't dare to hope, but if there's such a thing as a miracle, please give her that chance. Just once in her life." The man folded the letter and looked up toward the balcony above the stage, where a man stood silently, hands resting on the railing, eyes fixed on the stage. He wore a simple white shirt, his hair streaked with gray. He had stood quietly through the entire performance. "That's her father," the producer said softly. The organizers quickly asked Isabel to return to the stage. She didn't understand what was happening, only that the host wanted her to stand before the audience one more time. The crowd, which had just applauded warmly, fell silent, as if sensing that something important was about to be revealed. The host stepped forward, bending slightly to ask, "Isabel, if your parents were watching right now, is there anything you'd like to say?" The girl looked down. It took several seconds before she answered, not with the clear voice expected of a contestant, but with the hesitant voice of a child who had never truly been asked that question. With sincerity, I just want to know why people leave without saying goodbye. But if you can't answer that, then at least please listen to my song." The host gave a signal. The spotlight shifted to the second-floor balcony. The whole auditorium looked up, and then the man stepped out. From the shadows, Isabel froze. Her eyes widened. Her hands began to tremble. The man said nothing. He simply walked slowly down the wooden steps, the spotlight tracing each step. There was no music, no effects, just a moment that millions of viewers would later call the moment America held its breath. When he stopped just a few steps away, Isabel whispered in a voice as soft as a breath, "Is it you, Dad?" He nodded. "I'm sorry," just 3 words. No explanations, no excuses. But to a child who had waited half her short life, those 3 words meant more than any reply she had ever imagined. For the past 6 years, Isabel didn't run to him. She didn't cry out or break down. She simply stood still. But for the first time, her shoulders relaxed. Her eyes no longer strained to hold back pain. Her hands unclenched the hem of her dress. The man, the one who had abandoned a home as fragile as a paper house, bowed his head, then reached out and wrapped his trembling arms around the little girl. In the audience, some began to cry. A mother in the front row pulled her son close. Simon Cowell put his hand to his face, not to hide tears, but as if steadying himself. Later, backstage, after filming ended, a freelance reporter approached Isabel for an interview. "How did it feel to see your father again?" Isabel paused, then replied softly, "I don't know if he'll still be here tomorrow. But today, at least, I got to sing for him." The very next day, Isabel Ray's audition video was posted on the show's official social media page. No special effects, no editing, just a girl singing with everything she carried in her heart. Within hours, it surpassed 5 million views. After that hug, the one all of America had witnessed, Isabel sat quietly in the backstage room, hands clasped, eyes still red. Great-grandmother Ruth sat beside her, holding her hand tightly, as if letting go would make everything vanish like a dream. Outside, hundreds of messages and calls flooded the production team. Hashtags like Fike Tucker, Fake Paper Houses, and Isabel Ray began trending. A small record label in Nashville offered to produce a studio version of the song she had just performed. A music professor from Berkeley called it the rawest piece of music I've ever heard. But Isabel didn't care about any of that. Not because it didn't matter, but because someone was standing outside the waiting room asking to talk. She knew it was her father. He stepped in hesitantly. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Isabel didn't look up. Ruth gave Isabel's hand a gentle squeeze, then quietly left, leaving just enough space for 2 people made strangers by time. The man sat down, hands resting on his knees, and let out a long sigh. "I don't know where to begin," he said. Silence. "Back then, I thought I was doing the right thing. Your mother and I, we were both young, both scared. And when I left town, I thought maybe one day things would get better. But the farther I went, the harder it was to come back." Isabel still said nothing, only stared at the paper cup in front of her filled with room temperature water, perhaps still warmer than the space between them now. Finally, she asked, "Why didn't you send a letter, a message, a photo?" The man nodded, as if he had asked himself that question 100 times. "Because I was afraid of what you might say." The silence that followed was long, but not as heavy as before. It was the kind of pause that was needed, the kind that lets people understand each other without saying too much. Isabel opened her backpack and took out her old music notebook, handing it to him. The first page was Paper Houses. The handwriting was wobbly but careful. At the bottom, a line in blue ink read, "For the homes that were once real." He read slowly, each word like a gentle slap. "Not," Isabel answered softly. "I started when I was 8, finished it on my 11th birthday." "You write beautifully." "I didn't write it to be good. I wrote it to remember." The man lifted a hand to his face, touching his glasses as if trying to hide something. When they walked out of the backstage room, neither said much more, but something in their eyes had softened. Ruth stood in the hallway, her face calm but her eyes heavy with exhaustion. The man looked at her, bowed slightly, and said, "Thank you for not giving up on her." She simply replied, "If there's still time, don't make her write another song like that one." The next day, Isabel stepped into the first recording studio of her life. It was a small room in West Hollywood with gray felt soundproofing on the walls and soft ceiling lights. She wore nothing fancy, just a white t-shirt, jeans, and her hair tied simply. But in front of the microphone, she had something most professional singers didn't: the truth. As the soft guitar began, she sang Paper Houses again. The sound engineer behind the glass shed tears. The session guitarist couldn't take his eyes off the strings. The recording was released as a simple live session video. No editing, no elaborate staging, just a child singing as if every word was a fragment of memory laid bare on an operating table. 3 days later, the video surpassed 10 million views. A journalist from NPR wrote, "In a world where voices are often auto-tuned to perfection, Isabel Ray reminds us that sometimes the most moving thing is what's not perfect at all." In June, the finale of America's Got Talent was held at the Dolby Theater, a place that had witnessed many glorious cinematic moments, and now was about to welcome a new chapter written by a small girl from Owensville, Kentucky. Backstage, Isabel Ray stood with trembling hands, holding a sheet of lyrics. It wasn't Paper Houses she had chosen to sing this time. Instead, she picked a song her great-grandmother used to hum while making tea on cold nights when the wind howled through the rickety wooden walls of their mobile home. "You Are My Sunshine," not because it was famous, but because it was the first song Ruth ever sang to her, right after her parents left. The stage glowed in warm light as the host's voice rang out, "And now, please open your hearts to the youngest finalist of the season. The one who made us cry, then rise to our feet. And now, to reflect on ourselves, please welcome Isabel Ray." The applause rose, not cheers, no theatrics, just the shared rhythm of compassion echoing throughout the theater. Isabel stepped onto the stage wearing a dress made from 2 of Ruth's old shirts, a gift from a local seamstress. The white fabric was soft with a ruffled collar and puffed sleeves. She was barefoot, just like when she sang in the bathroom back home where her story had first begun. The spotlight was gentle. There was no backing track. The little girl sang with a voice that was not powerful or trained, but filled with light, just like the lyrics themselves. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray." In the third row, Ruth sat upright, hands clasped over her chest. Her face was calm, but tears streamed down her cheeks. Her father, sitting beside her, held her hand for the first time, not to ask for forgiveness, but to share in the pride. When Isabel reached the final line, "Please don't take my sunshine away," her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. She just smiled, because she knew her sunshine was sitting right there, still with her. After the performance, the entire audience rose to their feet. No one needed to be told to stand, no signal from the host, just a natural, heartfelt reaction to something so pure it left them breathless. Simon Cowell, the show's toughest judge, stood silently for a moment, then spoke a line that moved the entire country. "This little girl is not just a singer. She is a bridge connecting broken hearts with the hope that music can still heal." Then, something unexpected happened. The producers stepped onto the stage and handed Isabel not just a certificate, but a symbol of something much greater. Acknowledgement of her courage, her truth, and the light she brought into all their lives. The producers not only placed her in the top 3, but also awarded Isabel a full music scholarship to the Juilliard School, reserved for young talents without formal training. A representative from a major record label announced they would release Isabel's debut EP, featuring Paper Houses as the lead track, accompanied by "You Are My Sunshine" as a special live recording. The media buzzed with excitement. TV stations scrambled to secure interviews. But that night, on the long bus ride back to Owensville, Isabel simply rested her head on Ruth's shoulder and whispered, "I don't need to be famous. I just want you to hear me sing every time you're still awake." Ruth smiled softly, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "If I'm alive, I'll be listening. And if I'm not, I'll listen from somewhere a little higher." Years later, Isabel Ray became a celebrated singer-songwriter, not just for her unpolished voice, but for lyrics that seemed written straight from the heart. In a televised interview, the host asked, "What was the moment that changed your life forever?" Isabel didn't hesitate. "It was when my grandma stood up in the crowd." She said nothing, just stood there, hand over her chest, as if telling the world, "This is my granddaughter, and I've listened to her with my whole life." When no one else knew who I was, she did. And that was enough. For many older viewers, those who had known loss, who had been forgotten, or who had once been the small source of warmth for a child in the dark, this story wasn't just Isabel's. It was their story, told through the voice of a little girl who had once been left behind. And so, the journey of Isabel Ray came full circle, from a quiet girl in a forgotten corner of the world to a voice that made an entire nation fall silent. If this story touched your heart in any way, Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so we can keep preserving moments as beautiful as this in the midst of a busy world. See you on the next journey.